Good evening, everybody, and thank you all for joining us for this presentation this evening. We're still waiting for a few more people to start, but we'll get going. My name is Cindy Levine, and I currently serve as co-president of the League of Women Voters of Wilmette. I'd like to thank a few people who have worked to organize this event. Our anti-racism advocacy co-chairs, Patience Kramer and Ann Sullivan, and our event chair, Joan O. We'd also like to thank Kathy Hussey Arnson and Rachel Ramirez from the Wilmette Historical Museum for sharing their archives with us and the public. Next slide, please. As many of you know, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization encouraging informed and active participation in government. We work to influence public policy through education and advocacy. For the past several years, the Wilmette League has been a vocal advocate for social and racial justice, and we continue that focus in our 2021 action plan with a strategic objective of working to create a more inclusive community. We have worked alongside others to advocate for affordable housing, for the reinstatement of the Housing and Human Relations Commissions, and we have encouraged all of our local boards to articulate and act upon inclusion statements. We have worked with our League colleagues across Illinois to evolve our criminal justice advocacy position. And we have participated with other local groups in anti-racism rallies, and we are working collaboratively to bring more education opportunities to our community. Next slide. It is with this education lens that we're hosting tonight's presentation from the Wilmette Historical Museum, Racism in Wilmette, A Visual History, which draws on the museum's online exhibit, Racism, A History, and other archival material. We know that our community is eager to learn about Wilmette's history as we work for racial justice at a time of a nationwide focus on systemic inequities. We have a large audience joining us this evening. We had over 180 registrants for this among community members as well as our local leaders. And we're therefore conducting this as a webinar, which means that only the panelists will be on screen and audience members do not have the ability to comment directly to the full group. We will be recording this webinar and the recording will be available for future viewing on our Wilmette League website. Material in this presentation is disturbing and we want to be sensitive to the diverse audience who has joined us tonight. We believe it is important to acknowledge the past and educate ourselves collectively on what has happened in the past and what we need to move forward from. We anticipate that this presentation will be provocative and will raise several questions for our community about our past, and importantly about Wilmette's future direction. We encourage you to contribute questions, comments, and suggestions via the Q&A function. After the presentation, Ann Sullivan, the League of Women Voters of Wilmette action leader focused on creating a more inclusive community, will facilitate a Q&A for our museum hosts on the exhibit itself. They will be able to answer questions about the exhibit and how it was compiled. For more general questions, we will capture the community input and share a synthesis of those questions and perspectives with our local governing bodies as they each consider their paths forward in working towards a more inclusive Wilmette. Additionally, this input will help us identify future education and interaction events. Next slide. There's introspection going on at organizations and governing bodies across the country and within our community, as both individuals and groups are reckoning with and determining how to address racist and discriminatory practices in their past. The League of Women Voters has been on this journey as well, acknowledging the racist attitudes and actions throughout its history, the excluding of women of color in the fight for the 19th Amendment, taking too long to join the fight for civil rights, and for too long working from the sidelines on these issues. In acknowledging these shortcomings, the League has made a commitment to do better, elevating the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion into the core platform of the League's mission, and continuing to serve voters in underrepresented communities and advocating for social justice positions. I will now turn this over to our hosts and presenters for the evening, Museum Director Kathy Hussey Arnson and Museum Curator Rachel Ramirez. Kathy has been the director of the Wilmette Historical Museum since 1993. She has a master's degree in anthropology and has worked in museums for over 40 years. Before coming to Wilmette, she was on the staff of museums in Minnesota and Chicago. She has published several articles and one book about Native American history and about Wilmette history. Rachel Ramirez has been the curator of the Wilmette Historical Museum since February 2020, having previously held the assistant curator position. She graduated from Loyola University Chicago with an MA in public history. She has worked at other institutions in Chicago, in the Chicago area and the North Shore. And I now turn it over to Kathy and Rachel. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. And thank you so much for having us. Before we get started and launch into the presentation, I'll give you a little bit of a brief history of this online exhibit, which I hope everyone takes a look at if they haven't done so already on our website. So basically in 2020, the Wilmette Historical Museum received a number of questions about racism from researchers. We wanted to do something to use the resources, the sources that we had in our museum to examine racism in our community. And because of the uptick in questions, it seemed like it was a good time to do an online exhibit, especially because we were closed to the public at the time. So based on our somewhat limited sources, we knew that our scope would therefore be somewhat limited, but because the interest was there, and this was an important topic, we knew that this online exhibit was something that we wanted to do. So that's how our online exhibit, Racism, A History, came to be. And that's kind of the basis for this presentation tonight. So this presentation will examine two areas of racism that are reflected in our sources, both which serve to exclude in their own ways: blackface and discriminatory housing practices. So here is an early example. This is from the Chicago Daily Tribune from January 22nd, 1904. The type of language that we see in this article is something that you will see kind of again and again in these news articles. So we have North Shore towns aroused, influx alarms residents. And if you note the highlighted line, the last part of it, the newcomers are deemed especially objectionable by the authorities, as there are 4 times as many cases of assault and larceny according to police figures. So in the same year, from our collections, we have this program. So this is from the Wilmette County Fair. This took place in September. This was an event that was September 2nd through 3rd at 13th Street from Lake to Forest. It was sponsored by the Ladies Guild of St. Augustine's Church. And these images here are, at left is the cover of the program, and then the 2 other images are pages from the program, all of which we have in our collection. So judging from some of the festivities described here, it sounds kind of like what you would imagine an old-fashioned fair, or festival, or carnival would be like, with games and booths and food. There were Shetland ponies and a merry-go-round. But amongst the festivities were these 2 carnival-style games, which used racial slurs in the titles and made light of inflicting violence upon African Americans. So this is a close-up of the game on the page on the right-hand side in our previous slide. So from what I can tell, it's like the game where you throw a ball at a milk bottle and try to win a prize. But in this case, the name of the game used a racial slur. And if you look closely, there's not actually milk bottles, but it's little figurines that are stereotypical caricatures. Then there's this little song that they had printed in the program itself that goes, hit them high, hit them low, hit them in the nose, and tear their clothes. That's the way it goes. So it's very violent. So in this case, you know, we have from our collections 2 examples in the same year. White people alarmed about a so-called influx of Black residents moving to the area. And they claim that what they follow is an increase in assault cases, but at the same time, there are these two violent, racist games set up at what's, supposed to be a family church-sponsored fair. So moving ahead a little bit, this is from 1914. So this is the cover and the inside page of the Wilmette Country Club's minstrel show program. As you can see, there's actually multiple problematic images here in these couple of pages. So the Wilmette Country Club put on a minstrel show annually for a number of years. And as most of you are probably well aware, minstrel shows were a common form of entertainment in this country from the 1830s. And Jim Crow, as we all know of Jim Crow, was actually originated as a character created by a white minstrel performer. And the caricature became one of the racist characters that would appear over and over and over again in these minstrel shows. So this is a close-up of an image from the program, the 1914 program. As you can see, there's another caricature that was used in the program that appears throughout the program, characterized by an oversized jacket with long coattails. And then this is a lot to read, so I don't expect you to read all of it, but it's just an example of some of the skits and songs that were performed at these minstrel shows. So it's kind of hard to find, actually, which we wouldn't really want to find, but it's hard to find some of these songs and plays and to see what they were actually made of. Now, except for the first one, which is from 1906, this one is actually readily available online. You can still see the songbook and the music online, and it's quite offensive. And there's others from 1911 as well. And here's the Country Club minstrel show cast from 1911 with their blackface makeup. Almost everyone in the cast, except I think the three men at center, are wearing blackface. And then going ahead to 1939, this is a shot of some boys in blackface at the minstrel show at the St. Augustine's Episcopal Church Youth Group at the Women's Club stage, April 14th, 1939. So we know that blackface performances were not left in the early half of the 20th century. We still see that they were put on by groups, church groups and youth groups, in this case, both church and youth groups. Sometimes they were used, the blackface performances were used as part of a fundraiser for an organization. In our collection, we have photos of people in blackface up through the 1940s. So we know that these performances were still happening in Wilmette until at least then. On a national level, it took a very long time to attempt to get blackface out of common practice. In the 1950s and 60s, Black mothers sent their children to school after desegregation and were horrified to discover that blackface was still a common practice in schools. So really, they were the ones who led efforts to get it out of schools and to try to get blackface out of the daily cultural sphere. But until then, it had been really prevalent, even for elementary school children. So now I will go to the next slide and turn it over to Kathy.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm going to turn now to show you several examples of housing discrimination against African Americans from different time periods. I'm not going to have time to discuss discriminatory practices against other groups, but such practices did exist as well. My first two slides relate to a series of situations in 1913. Hostility toward Blacks intensified in the early 1900s in the US, and Wilmette was no exception. According to this report in the local newspaper of the time, a group of white neighbors in the vicinity of Elmwood Avenue and 17th Street made an appearance at the village board meeting on August 5th, 1913, to protest the sale of property in their neighborhood to a Black family. According to the article, they presented a petition which read in part, quote, "We respectfully request that each citizen use his influence to prevent further bringing into the village of Negroes, particularly with the real estate dealers handling property in Wilmette, to induce them to cease selling or renting to undesirable people," unquote. After reading this article, I searched in the village of Wilmette board minutes, looking for a petition or some mention of the incident. In the minutes for August 5th, 1913, the petition was described as, quote, "praying relief from unsanitary conditions in an overcrowded house on Elmwood Avenue near Ridge Avenue," unquote. The petition was referred to the Public Service Committee and the village attorney, but I was unable to locate the conclusion to the issue. However, legal maneuvers, including applying fines, were often used to harass Black families and pressure them to move out of the community. Next slide. The same group of white neighbors also organized the Wilmette Civic Association in 1913. The association's purpose was to keep African-American families out of the community, whose presence was described in another local newspaper article as, quote, "an invasion," unquote. Keep in mind that these local newspapers were likely papers that Black families were reading as well. The Wilmette Civic Association's bylaws couch their aims in phrases such as, quote, "to discourage and prevent, so far as possible, the sale or rental of property to undesirable persons, and to discourage the construction and erection of unsightly objects." Unquote. African Americans could not be members of the association, as you can see here in this headline to this article from 1913. Organizing such groups, particularly groups of neighbors, could be used to intimidate Black families and to control who lived or worked in the community. Next slide, please. The next example from the 1960s concerns a group of Wilmette residents who attempted to document and interrupt the discrimination they saw in the community. The Wilmette Human Relations Committee, not to be confused with the later Village's Wilmette Human Relations Commission, was a grassroots organization formed by Wilmette residents in 1963 to abolish racial and religious discrimination and intolerance in the community, their words. Their work extended into many areas, including petitioning the school to hire racially diverse faculty, contacting legislators to support civil rights legislation, working with home sellers and home buyers in the community to facilitate sales to Black families, documenting the existence of racial discrimination, and advocating for a fair housing ordinance, which passed in 1968. Joan Martin, the committee's housing chair in the 1960s, wrote about her experience in a 3-page account in the committee's archives at the museum. She describes a postcard survey of the 70 real estate agents serving Wilmette, asking if they would or would not serve people on a non-discriminatory basis. One replied in the affirmative, and another person phoned to say that she would be willing, but her boss at the firm had a policy that Blacks never be given service. No one else replied. The 2-page ad you see here was placed by the committee in the Wilmette Life in 1964. The heading reads, "The right of all people to live where they choose." It was an effort to reach out to the wider community, letting them know that there was support for a diverse community among its residents. The committee had over 1,500 members at the time and was most active from 1963 to the mid-1970s. Next slide. Another local group that attempted to address issues of housing discrimination was the North Shore Summer Project. This was a summer 1965 campaign to address housing discrimination on the North Shore. Organized by the Chicago chapter of the American Friends Service Committee and staffed by local student and adult volunteers, Part of the campaign sought to persuade area realtors to extend equal service to all potential homebuyers, regardless of race, religion, color, or national origin. Many of you may remember many of you may be familiar with the project because of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s appearance on their behalf at the Winnetka Village Green in the summer of 1965. In this July 1965 photo that you see before you, the summer project student volunteers are seen standing silent vigil outside the headquarters of the Evanston North Shore Board of Realtors, 3009 Central Street in Evanston. They were protesting the racial discriminatory housing system on the North Shore. At the time, realtors refused to show any North Shore houses to African-American families, a practice of long standing that had served to keep the community close to people of color. Silent vigils were held outside real estate offices in other communities as well. Reverend Emery Davis, summer project chairman and pastor of the Bethel AME Church in Evanston, explained, "We are holding these vigils to say that we no longer live under a segregated system. We are announcing our responsibility for having been part of it for so long. Now we are asking our fellow residents of the North Shore to join us in asking for a change." Next slide, please. Both the Wilmette Human Relations Committee and the North Shore Summer Project collected accounts from African-American families concerning their experiences seeking housing to rent or to buy in the community. Here is an excerpt from a longer account by Wilmette resident Jeremiah Floyd. And you can see part of it here. I'll read you a little bit more. "My family and I personally sought housing in this area for almost 3 years before acquiring our present house. We visited on a number of occasions, no less than 7 different real estate offices. We were not shown a single house in the village. I will not bore you with the details of every single visit, as they were in general quite similar. However, I'd like to summarize a few cases so you might get the flavor of what happened. We were told by one agent that he could not show us everything in his multiple listing book within our stated price range, even though he thought that we could easily qualify for the mortgage. A second dealer tried vainly to dissuade us from even looking here, stating that the prices were too high and that we should look in Evanston. A third dealer told us that he had no listing of the style and price that we were seeking. When we produced an address which had his for sale sign posted in the front yard, he left his private office and pretended to make a phone call. He returned and told us that the maid had said that the family was away in Florida on vacation. Having friends who lived in the neighborhood, we asked them to visit the family and check out the story. They learned that the owners had not been in Florida, nor had the subject of an appointment for us to see their house ever been raised by the realtor. And so it went. We purchased our home directly from the owners." Next slide. My final 2 slides relate to affordable housing issues. We have included this topic because our research has shown that some opposition to such projects can be race-based. We could point to several cases in the village over time, including the Baha'i elderly housing on Greenleaf in the 1950s, proposed reuse of Howard School for affordable senior housing in the early 1980s, and Shoreline Place in the 1970s and 80s. One thing that these projects had in common was an attempt by some residents to associate the projects with fear of African Americans becoming neighbors. And you'll see an excerpt here from the minutes of a group called the North Shore Citizens Committee, 1957 minutes. It was a North Shore wide predecessor to the Wilmette Human Relations Committee. Included in their minutes is the following. And I quote here, "Mr. Cleveland, who was a Wilmette resident, reported on a meeting of the Wilmette Village Council, which considered the Baha'i Order's request for a zoning change, which would permit erection of a multi-family home for elderly Baha'i members. He said that the lawyer for the Baha'i group disavowed racial aspects of the matter by saying that no non-white person had applied for use of the home. At a later meeting, the council voted 3-2 to overturn its zoning board, which had granted the Baha'i request. This apparently was the result of considerable protest from a builder who had stirred up resentment in the area concerned, unquote. Eventually the home was built, but apparently there was quite a bit of controversy at the time. Next slide, please. This is our last slide. The Shoreline Place Affordable Housing Project at 324 Linden Avenue was built with federal funds and opened in 1987, but the struggle to construct the building started in 1973. Neighbors organizing under Wilmette Committee for Small Buildings fought the project through the Zoning Board and the Zoning Board of Appeals, and when the Zoning Board approved the project, the neighborhood organization fought the project through the courts. There was an opposing group of Wilmette residents, some of who you might know, Dave Meskel, Ralph Klinge, and others, who worked to see that the project was completed. So there was an opposing group to the Wilmette Committee for Small Buildings. As you will see from the newspaper opinion shown here, the opposition sought to link the project to a Chicago housing project. The quote was from an anonymous The quote in this newspaper article was from an anonymous 1980s flyer that was distributed in the community. The flyer's author voiced hostility to the project and stated that the project will bring, quote, low-income groups from crime-ridden housing projects such as Cabrini Green to the North Shore, as well as lower property values and impoverished village government. None of these issues was substantiated with facts. I will leave you with a quote from Princeton professor Keeanga Yamada Taylor's book, Race for Profit. In discussing the 1960s and 1970s, she writes, within African-American communities, the desire for rebuilding urban Black housing was not an embrace of segregation, but an expression of the sheer exhaustion with the multiple obstacles erected to housing opportunities, making, quote, fair housing, unquote, seem less possible or even desirable. Out of this frustration emerged debates over political strategy in how to address the persisting urban housing crisis. Emerging questions over whether to, quote, gild the ghetto, unquote, by seeking to redevelop urban areas where African Americans were becoming majority populations, or to continue to pursue, quote, fair housing, unquote, in suburban enclaves ensued. The debate sharpened as suburban officials refused to relent on the entry of low-income housing, and the Nixon administration neutered the ability of the federal government to intervene, unquote. Thank you for inviting us this evening. We began with questions from the public about why Wilmette has historically not been very diverse. We hope that through these examples, we have shown you some ways in which that happened. Rachel and I do not consider ourselves experts on these topics, but we are happy to reply to questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy and Rachel. We really appreciate the opportunity to see some aspects of the exhibit that you have online. And I know there's more in the online exhibit if people want to go to your website. I just want to encourage everybody that's on to go ahead and put questions in the Q&A. As Cindy said, because this is a large group, we have over 100 people, we're not going to be able to answer all questions, but if you'd like to put in some questions that you have specifically regarding the exhibit, we'd be happy to try to answer some of those. And again, I am Ann Sullivan, and along with Patience Kramer, I have been managing our anti-racism advocacy efforts this year and will continue to do so going forward for the next year or so, at least. So let me see, can we start with some questions? Kathy and Rachel, you all set? Okay. So the first question is about how you collected the material and how do you decide what is relevant to keep as an artifact for the historical record?
Well, we've been, I'll take the first question. This is Kathy. We have been collecting material for probably 15, 20 years. The Wilmette Human Relations Committee archives that I referenced were given to us probably about 15 years ago now. And one person has added to it as well. So that goes back. We have collected, where we have newspapers, which some of this material comes from, that have been in our archives for a very long time. And we've tried to collect, about 6 years ago, we started putting things in a folder, taking pictures, scanning things from the newspaper and putting them in folders and trying to put them in one place. And so this has kind of been, in a way, going on for a long time. But when we started doing some exhibits on the 1960s and on West Wilmette, where some of these issues have surfaced also, we started again trying to focus on these things, or collect them together in one place, I should say. So we, if somebody has material that they think would be, that we'd be interested in, we'd be happy to talk to them.
And they should call you. They shouldn't just drop by with their.
Yes, that's right. That would be good to call or to email the museum. If you go to our website, you can get all that information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Another question is whether you have content from more recent history, and what are some examples of other things that you have in your collection that are more recent than what we discussed tonight?
Yeah, we do. We are collecting, anything. So we don't have a time frame that we don't collect from. So we collect from yesterday. So for example, we've taken signs that Black Lives Matter signs that people have had up, last summer. So that's something that we'd be interested in. It just depends on how it fits in our collection, whether it tells a Wilmette story, whether we might already have something like it. So yeah, it just really depends on what kind of story it tells. One of the things that you may have noticed is that we didn't have a lot of materials in this exhibit or in this presentation from certain time periods. And that's because, we showed you what we have in our collection. But one of the things about our museum is that we really rely on donations from people to shape our collection. And so it's what we have is a lot of times what's been given us. So we want to fill those gaps, of course. So we're collecting all eras. And there are some areas that we don't have as much from, for sure.
Okay, great. Another question is if you have anything in the archives about the history of racism at New Trier.
Well, we don't, because New Trier has their own archives. We don't actively collect New Trier. We do have some yearbooks that have been given to us by Wilmette residents over the years. So we do have a collection of yearbooks and some newsletters, a small number of them. I have to say we haven't looked at that. That's a nice question. We haven't really pored over them. I'm sure you can appreciate that we have a small staff, and it's, trying to, none of that kind of thing is indexed in any way. So, but I think it's a good idea.
Okay, great. Yeah. Another question, let's see, we have a lot of questions. And I just want to say to everybody that's asking questions, if we don't get to your question, we are going to keep a record of all the questions and possibly formulate that into future, education programs that the league can do, or forward them along to some of our elected officials if that's appropriate. So another question is, Glencoe, Evanston, and other townships had sections of the village for the help. What type of resistance was there for those who did not live on premise, but wanted to live near where they worked? In Wilmette, I'm assuming.
Can you repeat what was the last part of it? The question. What was the resistance? Is that what you said?
It says, what type of resistance was there for those who did not live on premise? I'm assuming to live in Wilmette and live where they work.
That's a good question. I don't really know. So this is one of the areas where we really would like to know more. We don't really know a ton about people who were, whether they were live-in, people working in a larger home or whatever. That's one of the areas we don't actually have a ton of information on, whether it's just something that hasn't come to us or it's not well documented, or those voices are, they were not written down or whatever it is. It's just, it's one of those things that we really wish we knew their stories a little bit better, but we just don't have it. And so that brings up, kind of what we have been talking about a little bit more, is that one of the reasons that we did this exhibit was that we were hoping that it would bring attention to these issues, of course, but also, we wanted people to know what we collect and what we're interested in collecting. And so if there are people out there, like you said, who have some kind of materials that might be related to that, we'd be interested in hearing about them. So that would be another area too, where, if you have something like that, please let us know. Yeah. So it's a good question, but
there's not anything currently in the.
Kathy, you might want to jump in.
I think one of the I agree with what you say. I think I started trying to look in the U.S. Census records starting in 1850 up through 1880. That's as far as I had time to do, looking for African Americans who were in the community. We know that there were some. John and Ella Smith had a grocery store on Wilmette Avenue, started in the 1880s. We see some African American kids in some of the school photos as early as, the mid 1980s or 1880s, excuse me. But they did not appear in the census records. And so that's a problem with the census records. So from those time periods, and that's generally acknowledged that that's a problem with the census records. And maybe they weren't living there right that year, but my guess is that they were not included. So it's a difficult problem.
We're getting a lot of questions about other groups, in particular Indigenous people. There's obviously a history in the founding of Wilmette of Indigenous people, but do you have any other things in the collection about Indigenous people, anti-Semitism, discrimination against Asian Americans or Latin American people of Latin American descent?
Yes, we Indigenous people, firsthand accounts, anything like that. No, we do not. We're talking about a period in the 1820s, and that's when people, Indigenous people were forced out of the North Shore in the Treaty of 1829. So we do not have that. they're in the Wilmette Human Relations Committee files. There is testimony and examples, accounts, sometimes not firsthand, sometimes firsthand from a committee member, talking about discrimination against people of Asian descent and people of Jewish families in Wilmette. There are examples of that as well, but the overwhelming ongoing issue, I would say, would be with African American families. And somebody asked about problems earlier about people not being able to, wondering if people could live in Wilmette who were, not bank presidents or whatever in the early period. And my example from 1913, I think, shows you the kind of thing that happened to try to force somebody who legitimately bought a house, trying to force them out. So if people want to come to the museum and look through the Human Relations Committee files, they're 4 archival boxes, so it's not a small thing to do, but you certainly be welcome to make an appointment and come in.
Okay. And the Human Relations Committee is different than the Human Relations Commission, which we have now. And what happened to the Human Relations Committee?
Well, I don't know, maybe I think I'll answer this instead of Rachel, because I'm more familiar with the files. I don't know. They seem to have, they worked for a fair housing ordinance that did get passed in 1968 and worked for some years after that. And I think people, I don't know for sure what happened, but there might be people in the audience or people who were members of that who might be able to enlighten us. It's not that answer is not in the archives.
Okay, right. And I know we said we were going to try to restrict the questions to what's in the exhibit and what was presented tonight, because obviously you guys don't have information if you don't have archival material about it. So we're collecting all these questions, and there may be others, as you said, in town that would be able to answer some of them. Someone also wants to know if you have any examples of restrictive real estate covenants in the archives, and whether you have any evidence about whether or not Wilmette was a sunset town, and if you know anything about sunset towns as well.
Rachel, do you want to take that, or do you want me to?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I don't think we really have evidence of restrictive covenants in Wilmette, do we, Kathy?
I don't think so. So these are things that would be on deeds, and we don't tend to have deeds in our collection. So not that we know of. We've never, and the same with the evidence of it being a sunset town, sundown town, whatever. I've never seen that. That's not to say that it didn't exist, but that I have not seen it in the records that we have.
Okay, and just to be clear, sundown town means that certain individuals were not allowed to be on the streets in Wilmette after sundown unless they lived in Wilmette, correct?
Yes, and I have looked in some of the village ordinances and that kind of thing, looking for some evidence of that, but the ordinances that I looked at were strictly about buildings and sewers and that kind of thing. So,
okay, great. Somebody had a suggestion about oral histories. Some of particularly the Holocaust Museum has done that. There's a lot of museums has done that. Is that, I know you have a small staff, but is that something that you would consider?
you want me to answer that, Rachel?
Sure, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. We have done oral histories with people like Jean Cleland, who later on was very active in fair housing issues, and other people. We have about 135 oral histories, and it's difficult for a small staff to fit that in, but we do try. And so if someone would like to talk to us on record about their experiences or in whatever way, you know, we'd be happy to talk to you about that.
Okay, great. One other question about the exhibit and the reach of it is whether this has been shared with the Wilmette Public Schools, any of the other schools in the area for their social studies educational purposes, or would there be a plan to do that?
I don't think it has been, but that's a good idea. It is, I mean, it's a very small exhibit. I'm not sure, you know, we've actually reached out to anyone yet, but it's something to consider, yeah, if they would be open to using it.
Okay. And then someone else wants to know, given the comment about not having extensive staff, whether you need volunteers to help take down oral histories or to help with other aspects of this project. Or any project, really.
So because of the pandemic, we have not had any. We do have a nice group of volunteers, and because of the pandemic, they have not been at the museum in the last year and a half. We do have permission to start having one person at a time, starting in June. And so we are going to be doing that, but it will be a gradual process for us to integrate the volunteers back into the museum. But we certainly love our volunteers and do rely on them. We used to have a group of people who did oral histories. Clara Stetter, who I know was a league member for many years, was one of our very good oral historians, did a lot of oral histories for us and other people. She was particularly great with her knowledge of Wilmette and her journalism background. If anybody's interested in that, please contact us and we could talk.
Okay. Great. And just to reiterate, a couple of people are asking about the online exhibit. You know, this is a part of what's in the online exhibit. How do they find that on your website?
Yeah, so you go to our website, wilmettehistory.org, and there's actually oh geez, now I feel like I'm being quizzed. There's an
no pressure.
There's a drop down for exhibits, and you'll see online exhibits. If anyone can't find it, just let us know. You know, we have a lot of stuff on our website, and so it's actually kind of hard to navigate sometimes. Okay. But if you can't find it, just let us know. But there is an online exhibits drop down. It's under the exhibits portion, so that's where it is.
Great. Okay. And so someone wanted to know if you've had any comments or feedback about the exhibit since you put it up. I know I saw it on your Facebook page. It's been there for a little while. Have you had any feedback from anyone in the community about it?
We've had a number of people tell us, quite a few number of people have told us they've seen it and that they liked it. Other than that, other than kind of general comments, no, we haven't had anything very specific. So yeah, I guess that's that. Yeah, right.
I would say we probably would welcome specific feedback. You know, we put a lot of time into it. So if anyone has any other specific feedback, we would love to hear it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Great. I mean, I think this is great that you're providing this resource and that you responded to community requests for it and put it together, because there's all kinds of, we always have a lot of questions and sometimes we don't know where to turn. So I think it's great that people can reach out to you and, if there's something available in the archives, they might be able to find the answer to their questions. So that's great. I also have a request from one of the Human Relations Commissioners who's on for a possible presentation to them by the museum. So I can connect you guys, but I just wanted to mention that was one of your responses from tonight.
Terrific.
So.
Sure.
Okay,
sure,
great.
we'd be happy to do that.
Okay, great. All right. There's a lot of stuff here, but I'm gonna, like I said, we're gonna copy it and we can forward some additional questions to you if people have them. And just so everyone in the audience knows, we are recording this, which I'm kind of horrified to say, but it'll be on our website, and other people will be able to access it if they're interested. And you can also go on the museum website, as we said, to see the rest of the exhibit. And anything else you want to tell people about the museum? Do a little promotion.
Well, there is also a blog that you can see on our homepage in the lower right-hand corner called Civil Rights on the North Shore, which is a little bit of more information about the Human Relations Committee. If you go to our website, you might be interested in looking at that as well. We are doing it. We have a busy summer. We are doing a history mystery for kids 13 and under. Anybody older can, but kids 13 and under will get a little bit of a prize when they, courtesy of Lou Malnati's, a small personal pizza. And so, in an effort to get kids out, it's entirely outside, and get them out and learning a little bit about more about local history. We've been doing this every year for about 5 years, but usually it's been in conjunction with the Wilmette Chamber of Commerce. And with COVID, we moved it last year to outside, but there's that starts in mid-June. We're also doing a historic garden walk to replace our house walk. Again, something outdoors. That's July 25th. And we are launching something which three of our, not including me, I would say, our other three staff members have worked very hard on our first audio tour called Local Legends. It debuts June 1st. There'll be 2 parts. The first part debuts June 1st, and it gets you into looking around the village at places where well-known people for various reasons have lived, and learn a little bit about them. So that's our first audio tour that we've produced in-house. So, and we are open again for by appointment right now, Wednesdays and Thursday afternoons. And as of June 6th, we'll also be opening on Sundays. So as of June 6th, we'll be open Sunday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Not our full component that we usually do, but this is what we can manage for a variety of reasons right now. So hope you come, make an appointment, give us a call, send us an email, and we'll set you up.
Okay, great. I mean, thank you so much for doing this. We really, really appreciate it. And
sure,
I'm going to kick,
yes,
I'm going to kick it back over to Cindy to close us out.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Kathy and Rachel, for guiding us through this history. As we noted earlier, attendance at this event and the questions and comments offered demonstrate the community's interest in understanding our past and determining how we move forward in individual and collective efforts to create a more inclusive community. The League of Women Voters of Wilmette will continue our work to proactively educate the community and facilitate a deeper understanding of inclusivity. We will be offering living room conversations with local leaders for our members. So please let us know who you would like to hear from. In collaboration with other organizations, we will speak out to address racism, xenophobia, and bias. We encourage everyone to sign up for the community education series that's organized by Heroes, the local community group focused on healing everyday racism in our schools. And our league is pleased to be one of the co-sponsors of their speaker series that's designed to raise awareness of the history of racism in our communities. And you can find information about the series on our website as well as on the Heroes website. We will proactively advocate for local government bodies' policies to ensure greater inclusivity and monitor progress towards achieving those stated inclusivity goals. We encourage people to take advantage of the opportunity presented by the Human Relations Commission to share your perspectives. They have a dedicated email address, which is simply humanrelations@wilmette.com, or join their first community engagement session, which will be on June 12th outside of Village Hall. And we encourage you to reach out with your points of view to any of our local officials across all the boards. And we will continue to be monitoring the village's efforts to develop more inclusive and affordable housing. There's be a ribbon cutting this summer, we expect, at Cleveland Place. And we expect residents to be moving in the fall. And we also would like to diversify our membership to better reflect the diversity currently within our community. So we welcome your engagement and involvement with us. Our membership renewal season is underway and we welcome new members anytime. So please join us. And thank you all for joining us for tonight's event.